Hey folks, Beirbones here. So I'm gonna do a beginner's guide on how to install EK Waterblock, and I've also got a backplate as well, which I'll show you how to install. It's relatively simple how to do this, but some people, might be a bit cautious how to do it, and I'm gonna kind of add a few tips in as well whilst I'm going through it. So I've got my 1080 nickel and black acetal waterblock, and I've also got a black backplate as well, which I'll be putting onto this 1080. Generally what you'll need is some Phillips head screwdrivers. I've actually got some Watchman screwdrivers, or kind of jewelers screwdrivers, various sizes will generally help you. For this 1080, I know some of the screws are really quite small, so it's handy to have a kind of small and varying sizing ones. I've also got some scissors as well. That's handy for cutting the thermal pads. I've also got a 4mm socket head, which I actually need for this because I know there's some kind of nuts for the backplate that connect onto the PCB, so I need this to take them off. And I've also got this stuff called Clean. A lot of people use isopropyl alcohol. I just use this Clean. It's a thermal material remover, and then the second stage is the purifier, so it purifies the thermal plate. And you'll also need some cotton buds or Q-tips depending on where you're from. There's also a microfiber cloth that you'll probably need depending on how much thermal paste you've got there. And that's pretty much it. If you are looking for the socket set, it's a Baco socket set that I've got, which is generally a really good make. It also comes with its own little ratchet that comes with it, and I've got the 4mm hex socket head. It's actually a really nice piece of kit. This cost me about £12, so if you are looking for one, I got it off of Amazon. I don't use anti-static bands. I really don't use anything that's kind of for anti-static. I've never really used it, and chances are I probably never will. I've never had any issues with anti-static. I've got no carpeting in my house, it's all kind of wood flooring, so I've never had any issues. But I'd probably advise, if you do have one, use it. I don't have one, so I'm not going to bother. But just to be on the safe side, I'd probably use it if you do have it available to you. So I'll go through this, I'll unbox this, I'll unbox the water block and the backplate, and I'll put this all together and kind of go through a couple of tips on what to do and what not to do, and generally things to watch out for, and depending on your water block that you've got. But this is for an EK one, depending on where you're getting it from. There might be different brands that are different, so just be aware of certain things. Definitely read the instructions. It would be one of the main things to do anyway. I've done this a few times now, so generally I kind of just skim over it, but definitely have a good read of the instructions just so you don't kind of cause yourself any bother, because there's no point paying all this good money for a graphics card and then to destroy it with a water block. So just be careful with what you're doing, guys. So what you'll want to do is you want to take off the backplate screws, get the backplate off first. So that's the backplate off. Now what you're left with is you'll have these 4 screws which hold the actual fan assembly, the thermal plate onto the actual die. Well, press it, kind of compress onto the die so it gets like a good kind of contact. And then the rest of these, which are kind of, I'll just call them nuts because they're kind of hexagonal. All these nuts need to come out as well because they are actually what's holding the fan assembly onto the card. So you can take them off. It's a 4mm socket head. I've actually got a socket set. I actually got this, I've had it for a wee while now. It cost me like £12. A little Baco kind of socket set, which I've had for a wee while, and it's actually really, really good. It's actually a really nice socket set, and it's actually really small. So pretty much you can just go around the board. I've actually seen people, it says in the EK manual for this that you can actually use pliers, like optionally, instead of like a hex socket head, which I really wouldn't recommend, just because you've got quite a high chance of kind of slipping with the pliers and kind of wiping off something like any of the resistors or whatever off of the back of the board. So definitely don't scrimp. Just get a hex socket head beforehand and use that. It's make your life so much easier. Now double check that you've definitely took out all of the hex socket heads. There's one still there, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out, there's 2 screws at the top. As you can see, once it comes apart, there is 2 little kind of connectors at the bottom of it, so you need to disconnect them. They can be quite fickery to kind of get off, and once you disconnected them, then you can just pull the fan assembly off. The best idea is just to kind of wiggle these out. Try to pull on the actual connector, not the wires, in case you pull one of the wires out. Does help if you've got nails, like I don't have any nails whatsoever. Right, so move that over to the side, and this is pretty much what you were left with, as well as a couple of thermal pads that are kind of still stuck onto the memory chips. So what I'll actually do, best idea would first to be to put on the backplate that we've took off already, put that back on to the fan assembly, you know, have that all set up, move that out the side, and then you've just got this kind of ready to go. You know, once you've got all the screws back in the backplate and put into the fan assembly, you know you're not going to lose anything, so it's kind of like a good practice to do. So I'll do that quickly just now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take off this old kind of thermal paste, which is kind of going quite hard now. I'm going to take that off, clean up this plate a little bit because it looks kind of shitty, I'm not going to lie. Clean off of this thermal plate, and then what I'll be doing is I'll put on the back plates again. I'll put the back plate back on to the actual card with all the screws, just so we don't lose anything kind of in the process. It's generally just a good idea to do this just so you don't lose things, because you know, especially if you don't have magnetic trays or whatever, you can lose stuff quite easily. So we're at the stage now where I've got the actual fan assembly off. I've put the fan assembly with the backplate back together so we don't lose anything. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean up the die, because there's still some thermal paste on it. I'll kind of quickly clean up the memory, the chokes, and kind of the phases and the VRM. I'll clean that up quickly just to kind of get them all kind of nice and clean, and then what we can do is we can put on the thermal pads and then put on the thermal paste, and then we can get the actual water block put on. So just these Q-tips are actually really good for these kind of things, because you can kind of soak them a wee bit and then just kind of clean it off. This is the thermal material remover that I'm using at the moment. So now that I've cleaned the die, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the memory chips and the chokes, and clean that up because I can see there's kind of some of the thermal pads. They've got like a gluey kind of substance kind of that's on them. So I'll kind of quickly clean all that up, get all that cleaned up. If you're using alcohol, I'd just be very aware if you can actually put the alcohol onto the memory chips. I'm really not 100% sure. I'm sure you probably can, but I'd just double check that. I've never really put alcohol on them, so I'm not going to say if you can or can't. Double check that yourself beforehand. Right, I'm happy enough with that. So what you can do is, if you get your thermal pads, yeah, double check which ones go where, because sometimes, you know, there'll be ones of different thicknesses. Like there's a 1mm one here, and then there's a 0.5mm one here. You'll be able to tell because, you know, they're different, bigger. But, you know, generally check where each of them goes. They'll go in like certain places. So know for a fact that these ones go on the memory chips, the ones that are actually pre-cut, which is actually quite nice. They'll go on to the memory chips, and then I'll put the other ones on the chokes and the MOSFET, sorry. And there we go. So what I'm going to do now is I'll actually unwrap the block that I've got. I've actually got a matte. It's kind of like a, well, it's acetal black, but it kind of looks like a matte black kind of colour, which is actually quite nice. But I think the back plate's actually shiny, so I'll see kind of how they go together. I'll actually move this out of the way a little bit. I don't really want to drop this block in it. We'll open this up anyway. And what I'll do is I'll quickly clean the water block, the actual faces that are going to be sitting on the GPU. Just double check everything's okay with your water block when you get it, just so you know you don't want to have to be sending it back. So I'll quickly give these just a rough little clean up, and then I'll put on the GPU paste and the thermal paste for the GPU die, and then we're ready to rock. So now that I've got all the thermal pads on, guys, I'm going to put the GPU paste on. So it says to put it in like a star shape, so I'm going to kind of go like across and then, you know, a couple of kind of dibs there. Then what I'll do is I'll put the water block onto this actual box that it came with, set that on that, flip the GPU over, and then place it gently down on top, and then I'll get the GPU screws in, so they're kind of all evenly placed. and then we're pretty much ready to go to kind of start putting on the rest of the screws and then put on the back plate. So I'll put on the paste just now. You don't need kind of, a lot of people kind of overthink, you know, how much paste they need to have. Generally, as long as you put on enough, you're okay. You know, if you put on too little, it'll kind of cause a bother. You can put on too much, but with GPUs, I wouldn't really say you could put on too much, because, you know, it's not like with a CPU where if you had too much on, you know, it could touch any of the pins, you know, overlap and go into the pins. With this, there's no really any pins. So as long as you manage to cover the whole die, you know, do it whatever kind of method you want. I know a lot of people kind of smear it on with like a bit of card, or, you know, they do like a grain of rice. I'm just going to go with the way EK as mentioned to do it. So I'm going to do like kind of like a little cross. Now I'm going to do a couple of dots either side. Probably doing a star shape would be a bit much. So it's kind of probably the world's worst looking star, but it'll do the job. Once we put the block on, it'll kind of compress it off and compress it enough so that it kind of sits, you know, flush with it. So we'll kind of move the GPU out of the way, and I'll put the card on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip the card over, and then I'm going to place it down gently onto the water block. Like so. So once you've got the water block kind of settled onto the card, what you can do is you can start putting in the screws. Make sure you're putting in the right screws. With the water block that I got, it's a 1080, but it also works with the 1070, so make sure you are using the right screws. I think there's different screws. So what I'll do is I'll put a screw in kind of either side of the GPU. I'll probably get the other ones in as well, and then I'll start tightening down on the GPU die. So I'll have tighten the one up here, the one there, the one there, and the one there, so it kind of sits flush. What you don't want is to tighten like one whole side like this side, then it kind of like sits at like a kind of an angle. So you want to have it kind of like flush. So what you do is just start putting in your screws, and then just kind of get them hand tight. Just so they're threaded in, but no more. So what you can start doing now is you can start tightening it up. So just kind of go diagonally across. So tighten that up a bit, and then go like across the way from it. Tighten that up a wee bit, and then same again. Just so that it's kind of evenly kind of tightened down. Kind of go back across these, make sure they're definitely tight down. And then I'll tighten up the rest of the screws. What I did here as well is I found out which screws I was actually needing for the backplate. So these screws I actually need for the backplate. So I put washers over the ones that I was actually needing just for the water block, so that I kind of knew what I was needing. I also had this the screw for the video connection, just to kind of screw that into make sure that's tight as well. So they're all tight now. What I'll do is I'll put the backplate on, put the thermal pads on the backplate, put that on, screw that down, and then that is it. So now I've got the backplate here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a piece for, I think roughly, if I cut off the right length for this, I think that'll fit perfectly there. It looks fit. So I'll cut this off, and then I'll place these two on, and then I'll put the backplate onto the actual card itself. So once you've got the thermal pads onto the backplate, what you can do is you can start tightening down your backplate. Make sure you are using the right screws as well, and make sure they are kind of lined up properly. Sometimes, depending on how the water block's sitting, it might not line up properly, so you just need to be wary of that. Don't over tighten them either. Once they're kind of in place, just kind of give them a little tighten up just to kind of get them into place. Don't go kind of really excessive with tightening, or you can kind of start bending stuff, or kind of de-threading the inners. just go over them again, make sure they're all roughly tight. And then that is it, guys. So that is a EK backplate and water block all installed together now. It actually looks quite nice because it's got like the matte black kind of effect. I actually quite like that on the water block. And then the actual backplate itself has, you know, like a kind of like a sheen to it, which is nice. I would have liked if they were both maybe matte, but you know, I actually quite like the kind of effect on this, because this is kind of the side you will see is the shiny kind of side, which is good. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. If you've got any questions about any of this, you know, feel free to ask. Just, you know, say in the comment section if you've got anything you kind of like help with. If you did enjoy the video, you know, please like it. If you didn't, you know, dislike it, you know, whatever. And if you want to see more stuff like this, guys, please subscribe. It would help out a lot. And thank you very much for watching.